All right, I want to welcome everybody to the latest episode of my series, The Strange and Unexplained Phenomena of the South Mountains of North Carolina. I am your host, Kaiser Rebel, and this is episode 7, and it's titled Dark Roads and Red Eyes. In the summer of 2021, I was approached by an elderly gentleman who said that he had had an encounter many years earlier that he wanted to tell me about. As a matter of fact, the words he uses get off his chest. He said that he had not spoken of it since the night it happened, the night that he described to his father what happened. And so we sat down and talked, and I listened to the man's stories. I saw his eyes kind of glaze over as he went back in time. And I would say that almost immediately that you could see kind of a fear in his face. He said November of 1952, he was 14 years old, and was living on a small family farm in northeastern Rutherford County, which was butted right up against the South Mountains. That particular night, he was getting ready to go to bed, and his father came to him and said that he needed him to go down to the shed and check the gas valve on the tractor. He said that it was about a quarter mile from the house, down a little narrow dirt road. So that immediately he was frightened to do that. He was scared to do that because the local guidelines was you simply didn't go outside at night far away from the house unless you absolutely had to. But also the encounters and the stories that his grandfather had shared with him regarding a wampus, which was just an old-fashioned word for a booger or a monster. And the grandpa's stories will be included in a future episode. But that he was also raised that if an elder asked you to do something, that you did it. And so he pulled his overalls on and he grabbed a lantern and he lit the lantern and he went out. He said immediately upon going out of the house into the darkness that he felt just a sense of uneasiness, was very uncomfortable, just a bad feeling in general. And that he chalked it up to his mind trying to play games with him. And that he was determined not to be a scaredy cat. He said as he walked down that dirt road and he started this journey down to the shed and the barn area, that feeling increased, the bad feeling, a feeling that he was being watched by somebody, that it just got worse with every step that he took. And he said as he approached the gate to this area, that he heard off to his right an animal sound, and I asked him to describe it. He said, well, it was an animal sound he had never heard before, but that it sounded like a sick owl, only with a really deep voice. And I further pressed him, and he made the sound of whoop, whoop. And he continued his story as he was trying to get the gate unfastened. He said he was already nearly to a state of panic, and his hands were shaking. As he was trying to get that chain unhooked, that he heard something walking just behind the shed, this barn area. And he got through the gate and he got to the shed where the tractor was, and that he was immediately overcome by this foul stench. He said that he had smelled it a few times in the past, only it was very faint. But he said that night it was so strong that it was nauseating. And I asked him to describe the odor to me, and he said that it was smelled like a pig that had been wallowing in a pig pen that was full of rotten bodies. And that's pretty characteristic of that smell in terms of correlating it with what other people have reported. But that as he got to the tractor, he set his lantern down, and he looked under there where that valve was. And as he began to move the valve with his hands were shaking, that he heard the walking again close to him, and that stench was even stronger. He managed to get that valve turned off. He said it seemed like an eternity getting that valve to shut off, but he got it. He said he picked his lantern up and he hurried back to the gate. And he was trying to close the gate, and hands shaking, and he was fumbling that chain around, and he finally got it latched. And he again heard the footsteps, only they seemed to be paralleling him. That it was just out of the reach of his lantern, out into the pasture beside that shed. He said that he turned around, and before he knew it, he was running. But the problem was he was carrying that lantern, and you can't see very far ahead of you carrying a lantern. 5, 6 feet, something like that. That he forced himself to slow down. He said the oddest thought popped in his mind. His daddy had this old plow sitting beside the dirt road, and that he pictured running into that thing in the dark, and nobody wants to run into an iron plow with their shin. He said it forced himself to stop running and was at a quick pace. And that as he went up the dirt road, that plow came into view. And one more step revealed that someone, he said, he thought someone was standing behind the plow. But another step revealed, in his words, that it was not somebody, that it was something. And I asked him to describe it. He said it was very, very big, 7, 8 foot tall, or even taller. And that it looked to be covered in a dark colored hair. He said, except for the face. He said he could see the mouth, but he could see the eyes. And he said it was the eyes that to this day, all these years later, he was 14 years old in 1952. Here it is, the early 2000s. And he said that it still to this day makes him have nightmares to think about those eyes looking at him. I asked him to describe it. He said as he held that lantern up, that those eyes shined red, and that it was just staring at him, and that it would blink and turn its head off to one side, cock its head to the other side. And he said that in his words, he said he couldn't go anywhere. He felt paralyzed. In his exact words was that he said he felt like he was standing in 2 deep post holes. He said he couldn't yell, that he couldn't move a muscle, and that thing was just staring at him and moving its head a little bit. He said that it grunted, and I asked him to describe the grunt. He said it was a very deep version of something like you would hear out of a boar hog. But he said finally, he was opening his mouth, nothing was coming out, and finally something came out. He was yelling for his father, and he finally was able to vocalize it. He said by then he was shaking so bad that his heart was going to beat out of his chest, and that when he yelled, that the thing moved its head and grunted again and stared at him for another couple of seconds, and then just calmly turned and walked away. He said it had approached the fence just beside the dirt road. He said it stepped over the fence. He said it didn't jump the fence. It didn't have to have any effort getting over the fence. It just stepped over the 4-foot fence. And that it walked into the darkness. And as soon as he lost sight of it, he started running. He said, if I ran into something, I was just going to run into it. But he ran all the way back to the house, screaming for his father. His father come out the back door onto the back porch and met him at the steps and said, what's wrong? What's going on? And he started telling him, and the father said, lower your voice. And he began to tell his father what happened. And his father said, I don't want you to ever forget this. He said, if you ever go back out at night again, you take my pistol, or if I can't go with you, you take somebody. If somebody can't go with you, you have that pistol on you. But never forget this night. And he said that his father told him, never speak of this again to anybody. And that his father also said that they would talk more about it later. And they did. I'll share that part of this in a future episode. But he said to this day that he has nightmares about those red eyes. Real quick, an elderly couple came to me in the winter of 2022 and said that they had had an encounter that night before. This was in November of 2022. And that they was riding up a road here in this area, north of Kaiser. And as they went up a hill, off to the right, he said he noticed this large person. He said as he got closer, he said it was way too large to be a man. And he said, I seen that it was covered in hair. He said, I slowed down because I was afraid it was going to step out in front of me. He said as they approached it, it turned its head and looked at them. And when the lights hit its eyes, that they shone red. And him and his wife were both shaking and said, we'll never go out after dark again. You guys take care. I'll see you next time. I appreciate you.